Play, Watch, Listen is a mostly games industry podcast featuring mostly game developers, and it is funded entirely by supporters on Patreon. Everybody, you'll notice today we have Tim Cain joining us to talk about dogs.
Let's go.
If you aren't familiar, Tim is how would you? I would describe you as one of the original creators of Fallout. Tim, does that feel fair? Is that an accurate assessment?
Yep.
Which is very cool. Thank you. We really appreciate that.
Yeah, no kidding.
It's one of my favorite franchises ever.
It's hard to believe we started working on it 30 years ago and about 4 months. January of 94.
Wild.
That invariably... Well, actually, wait. Parenthetical. Because obviously we're going to immediately go into Fallout discussion. And I'm also a huge fan of the franchise, so I have a million questions of my own. But... as a parenthetical, before you got here, Alana, before we were recording, we were talking about his YouTube channel in which composers show up in the comments to ask for questions about how to get into scoring games.
Mm-hmm.
Don't do that to my brethren. Like, it's such a weird thing to ask Tim Cain. I don't understand why we're such a piranha demographic, but I just needed to put it out there as a PSA. Don't go bother people who want to talk about game design and all these
Bother
other...
Austin.
Yeah, go bother Austin. It doesn't...
I'm more than happy to, but
it's not going to work, but I also get it. Like, Tim, I really like your YouTube channel. It's super cool, and it's so cool to see someone with, like, the amount of knowledge you have of the industry and the wealth of experience just like talking so candidly. Like, I feel like you're very clearly yourself, and it's awesome. I feel like
I appreciate it, and I love how many different ways people say I'm experienced, seasoned, and it's just I'm old and I've been doing it.
That's not what I was saying. It's just you've been making video games for as long as I've been alive.
You've ripened beautifully.
My career could almost retire.
That would be impressive.
But I get why people would come to someone who's accessible and friendly, who don't know any better, and ask the question.
And I try to give them advice, but I really don't know how game music composers got their jobs. They're always just there for me.
Yeah.
Well, and none of us know either, because it's always a string of one-off, lucky, random, this person talked to that person, and they happen to be walking in to meet that person, and suddenly you have a career. And if some like that movie Sliding Doors, if you had missed that one train, your entire life would not have borne out that way.
Totally.
So it's hard to give productive advice. You also said something that blew my mind. You said you can't evaluate art.
Not very well, no.
Yeah.
I have a very bad art sense, and I'm full spectrum colorblind. So those two things make it... I've always worked with an art director that I trust. It's one reason I've worked so many years or decades with Leonard Borarsky, the art director from Fallout. We made Troika together with another artist, Jason Anderson. And then I worked with him on Outer Worlds. In fact, he was when they asked me to be a game director again at Obsidian, I said, I'll do it if you can get Leonard Borarsky, because I can't do it by myself. And I need somebody next to me that I trust completely, that all the art stuff will just be handled by them.
What does that mean? What are the limitations that you feel like you have?
I have the same question.
Well, I find myself in meetings all the time where they're talking about, oh, we have a new cinematic, or here's a clip from the game, and we're going to talk about the visuals. And suddenly everybody's talking about, well, is this Art Greco or Art Nouveau? The palette's off. We really wanted this kind of lighting. And I'm like, it looks fine to me, but I don't want to say anything. So I just have never developed any kind of art aesthetic sense. I'll look at something and people are saying it's great. This is the best of this I've ever seen. And I'm like, it looks fine to me. And then somebody will look at this and go, this is terrible. We can't put this in the game.
What happens if you go to a museum?
I look at the pretty pictures.
But you're not like, nothing will...
Probably not.
I went to the Louvre once, and I thought the statues were the more interesting thing than any of the pictures.
That's so interesting.
Does that mean that when you say full spectrum, because normally when people say colorblind, it's like one subset.
Red, green, red, blue.
Yeah. So does that, I mean, were you born that way?
No. It's really sad. I made an artist actually cry when I told him what was happening. in my family, and there's 5 kids in my family, when you get to be about 20, 25, your color vision starts to fade.
Huh.
And because I remember color, everything became like watercolors. There were no bright colors anymore. It was like pale blue, pale green, very washed out reds. And then pinks and oranges started turning into grays and tans. And I have 2 sisters. They have it. The gene, because my mother started developing it in her 50s. So she had the gene, and her father was born that way.
Wow.
Full spectrum colorblind. So whatever he gave to her and she gave to all of her 5 kids, for us, it kicks in young adulthood. For her, it kicked in late adulthood.
Do any of
Wow.
your siblings have kids that are 25? I feel like that seems pretty unlikely, but
Yeah, they're all older than me. Some of the kids are like, I think one of my nephews is colorblind and it kicked in.
wow.
Neither of my nieces have it. I'm not sure about the other nephews and nieces. But what's interesting is, like, my sisters, it kicked in really late, like in their 30s or 40s. So maybe it comes in later for women than men, but it's strange. And I went at length. I actually I used Photoshop to desaturate photos in front of an artist. And I said, okay, here's a bright photo, a bunch of fruit. And I started desaturating it. And I said, I'll tell you when it looks different. And I had desaturated it over 50%. And I'm like, okay, it looks a little different now. And he said, this is almost gray.
Wow.
And I'm like, that's the world to me. Skyrim.
That explains
is my
why
jam.
Fallout's so green and yellow.
Well, we had an art director.
Yeah, I know.
But I was told both Arcanum and Fallout look kind of brown.
As far as X-Men superpowers, this isn't the best one.
Yeah.
But talk about way to not be
It does come with a bonus.
inhibited by it.
Okay.
And I didn't realize. I went to an ophthalmologist.
See through
'cause
walls.
She wanted to make sure I didn't have macular degeneration, and I don't. And she said, I bet you your night vision is really good. And I said, I think it is. I don't use flashlights. I walk the dog at night, have no trouble picking up after, even though everybody's saying, how can you do that? It's pitch black. But I also have trouble driving at night, because when I approach an intersection, I'm like, is it the top light or the bottom light? Because that'll tell me how to go through the intersection. And in Austin, Texas, or Dallas, the lights are horizontal. And I didn't know what to do. So I just stopped at an intersection until I could see what the cars were doing.
Oh my God, that's super interesting. That
sounds
it's like an
incredibly
accessibility issue if they're horizontal. I've never even thought of that.
We made Outer Worlds with a gray scaled UI for First Pass so that I could play it. And then they were allowed to change was it an HSV space? They were allowed to change H and S, but not V. So that guaranteed I would still see it and be able to play it. And because of that, there are no colorblindness options in the Outer Worlds, because anybody with any colorblindness can play it without needing those options.
Just by default. Damn.
Yeah.
That's
Wow,
awesome.
this
Yeah, I could do a whole episode about this.
no kidding. Talk about Dell with Fallout. This is
I
really
told you I ramble.
Wow.
I ramble.
No, we
I
love it.
love
That's
it.
our whole brand.
100%. This it's funny how I don't know if you've ever gone scuba diving, but when you get down below 40 or 50 feet, other than the fact that blue is so high energy of a wavelength that things tend to be very blue all the way quite deep. But reds and oranges and yellows disappear very fast. And so everything ends up being various forms of blue to gray, brown. And I would
What do you
imagine.
mean? Do you mean like even fish?
Yeah, literally the light can't propagate in water below, like the light, the water absorbs spectra, lower energy first. So reds are gone by 30 feet. Like
I've played
anything that's red
Abzu,
looks
Austin,
brown.
okay?
Total
That was
lie.
bright red.
Yeah,
You're a
total lie.
scam
I
artist.
played Subnautica. It looks fun.
Yeah. The thing that's cool is that things actually have those colors, which is really bizarre because it's a law of physics thing. This isn't a human eye thing. It's that the water is literally inhibiting the expression of those wavelengths. And so, but if you do a night dive, which are awesome, and you have a flashlight, obviously, because it's pitch black, you realize how crazy colorful everything is naturally. And I always thought that was baffling from an evolutionary biology standpoint, because nothing can see this. Like, why would it be red? Because you can't see that it's red. But when you turn on a flashlight, you introduce artificial.
You said it's not a human eye thing. I was going to say, can the fish see it and they're identifying each other?
I don't think so. I'm assuming it's kind of like almost like a vestigial organ type concept where it's a byproduct of some other process that's making them that color, but nothing can see it, and so it doesn't confer any evolutionary advantage or anything.
If you can only see the color when they're really close,
when it's artificial,
or
yeah, artificial light.
Huh.
Yeah, like with the flashlight. Anyway, that's the closest I imagine I've experienced to the way you see things, because it's still just a narrower palette of options, basically.
Blue was the last color I lost. As I started losing color, it was a gradual. It started with reds, then greens, and then into blues.
Wow.
So interesting. What a cool way with Outer Worlds to bake this into it and just make it a feature, like a kind of the idea of not having an accessibility option because it's just built in. It made me immediately wonder about other versions of that kind of thing.
I sat down with our UI designer and our UI artist, and I explained to them how it worked. I showed them my desaturation picture, and then I said, here's what I want us to do. And then once you make the grayscale art, and we have the game, they put the game in, we run the game that way. Once you do that, you're free to change anything you want, as long as you don't change the V. It's easier to think of an HSV instead of RGB. I said you can do anything you want after that. So I don't even know what our UI actually looks like in non-grayscale. It's just how I'm used to seeing it. Whatever they didn't change its look to me.
It's cool because that game I wouldn't have known if you hadn't told me. Like, when I played through it, it's plenty colorful. There's nothing about it that, like, Doom Eternal has colorblind settings, and they're very obviously colorblind settings. Like, to me, I could clearly see that the game looks different when you use them.
Yeah.
Outer Worlds, I never would have guessed.
Josh Sawyer apparently answered somebody's question because he told me he did it. Somebody tweeted, why are some of the accessibility options missing on Outer Worlds, like colorblind? He goes, you don't need it because the director can't see color. So
very cool. Wow. Anyway,
came in handy.
Yeah, Fallout. Austin, I don't know what you thought of it. So do you want to kick us off? What did you think of the show?
I realize both of you have made videos. I've watched neither. So
that's good. I prefer that.
Yeah. So just talk to me with regard, I want to know your opinions, bearing in mind my ignorance to what you've already put out there, and my apologies for that. I really liked it. I think that now that there's been a surge of game adaptations for film and TV, we are now, like, with a modern production mindset, versus, like the 90s Mario or things like that. We have a kind of fresh wave to make conclusions from. And I think of all the ways to adapt a game, this is probably, in my estimation so far, the best way to approach it. Because they are not adapting a given story. They are using the world as a narrative sandbox and telling their own. But it uses the same language. It draws on the things that you know. In fact, I watched a review where somebody was saying one of the few criticisms that they felt strongly about was that if you hadn't played the games, the show might be a little impenetrable because it just relies on a lot of assumed knowledge. I don't know if that's true because I've played the crap out of the games, and so there was a lot that I felt was very familiar, but I never found myself thinking, "Ooh, if I didn't know what that meant, I wouldn't." It felt more like Easter eggs.
One friend who I feel like I align with her tastes really strongly in film and TV, but she did not get the show. Like, she's
not played the games.
There was she just felt like she had so many questions. Yeah, because she hasn't played the games. That she never got answers to. So she was like, every episode was giving her like how's a stim pack made or whatever, which to us is just, who cares? It's the thing that heals you. Who cares? And I love that they did that.
They embrace they embrace a handful of things like that. But the thing is, Fallout, the sense of humor in Fallout is so core to the identity. There's a bit of an irreverence to it that it would be weird to try to offer up a biomechanical. Here's how stim packs, like, it's more tongue in cheek as it ought to be. Anyway, so my short version, my short summary, just in the widest view, is if I had a choice between uh, more Last of Us shows versus more Fallout shows, I would definitely choose Fallout because I like for the storytellers to be able to tell their own, and I'm not constantly measuring it against a thing that I deeply love. As much as I loved the Last of Us show, you can't not just be frame by frame going, oh, well, that, okay, that was pretty cool. That I liked it better when this one. Oh, it's hard for me to not hear Troy with that line. Oh, I liked Pedro's version of that line. It's like,
Yeah.
Jesus. Whereas this, you get to you just get to sit back and enjoy. So to me, it now, of course, not every IP lends itself to that. Like, I don't really, if someone pitched a Last of Us show that has nothing to do with Joel and Ellie, I probably would be like, just make a new IP at that point. Like,
Well, no, but you could dig into factions, which, like, I guess is what Fallout's done, right? Like, you could dig more into just specific fireflies or whatever. Like,
I guess,
I mean,
but
episode 3 is most people's favorite. It doesn't have either of them in it.
I mean, that's a fair point. That's a excellent rebuttal of my
Shut up,
argument
Austin.
I'm making. I know. I'm sorry. I'll catch you guys later. So yeah. Anyway, that's the long and short of it. What were your what is that? Are you broadly in agreement? I also just, of course, have the very obvious low hanging fruit question for you, Tim, of just what is it to watch something evolve over a 30-year period and to become a thing that now, more people watch this than the freaking Lord of the Rings show on Amazon. I mean, that's quite a thing to behold. I can't really even approximate that in my head.
I've deliberately talked to some of I've called them the OG group. I've called some people on the team, and we've talked about what it's like because it's very surreal. And this isn't the first time it's happened. I remember it was mid to late 2000s. I walked into a Target, and there was a Vault Boy T-shirt there. And I was like, "What is this?" Funko Pops, Fallout Funko Pops appeared, and it just. I saw a kid. I went to PAX West and I saw a kid, and he was 18. So, I mean, I'm really a kid. And he was dressed head to toe as Fall Out Boy and even had blonde hair, and he had greased it up in the curb, and he was walking around going like this. And I asked if I could have a picture taken with him. And his girlfriend took a picture of I going like that. Meanwhile, my husband leaned into the girlfriend and said, "Do you know who that is?" And he told the girlfriend, who then screamed, told him, and he had to sit down. He was like, oh god, I was just acting like I thought you were a fan. Oh god. I'm like, no, this was fun. It's just surreal because it was for the majority of the time we made it was about a little more than a dozen people, maybe 15 for the majority of the time. For the last year it went up to 30, but it was just a small group of people just doing something that we loved and we thought was funny, and we were really doing it for ourselves because at the time, and I know Interplay people are embarrassed when I say this, but Interplay had the Star Trek license and the D&D license. And I was told, I was the producer on Fallout 2. They told me, we're just waiting for you to be done so we can get all these people assigned to something that will make us money. And that changed about 6 to 8 months before we were done. Because Brian Fargo, the president of Interplay, took the game home and played it over the weekend. And he called me all the time. I'm stuck. What do I do? And when he got back, he was telling everybody, marketing, VPs. He's like, oh my God, this game is amazing. And suddenly I had all these people coming by my office, and they were like, we want a copy, and we want you to explain what you're doing. And often when I explained it, it's a post-apocalyptic game. The world's destroyed. You live in a vault, but everyone's going to die because they don't have a water chip. I remember one VP went, this is fun. That's your idea of fun? It sounds
funny.
I said, well, it can get funny at times. And she was like, how? But that's what I think the TV show did. It's funny, but not silly.
Yeah. Oh,
which is a hard line.
Yeah, it's still
walk.
super violent. The stakes is still really high.
Yeah. And
you care about the characters.
Yeah, and they're new characters. It feels, and I think this is what they're going for. It feels like a new game. It's a new set of characters. And I think they were smart to have 3 main characters because people play Fallout differently.
True.
And as soon as I finished the show, I realized those 3 characters are 3 different ways players tend to play. The nice player, the player who has goals, who's not necessarily going to be bad, but nothing's getting in the way of his goals, and then the murder hobo.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So it just made sense.
Do you know if that was a conscientious homage to those kinds of archetypes from a writing standpoint because it does slot
I'm guessing.
I would
very
think so too. Yeah.
neatly onto that. Because that's another big point as to why it's better to make a show with all new story and characters because like what is Fallout to you versus to me versus to a lot like anyone who's played any of the games are so variable. You know, it's like when people even games with far less player autonomy have uh, enough variation that to adapt it, you're now having to canonize something that may not be.
That's what I've tried to explain to people. There's a portion of the Fallout fan base who are gravely disappointed in me for liking the show.
Hmm.
And I've even tried to tell them, I get where you're coming from. I understand it. But what you have to realize is Fallout was such a player-driven game, how the story went, consequences, that your experience with Fallout is unique. It's not necessarily like your friend's experience. And we loved that when people started playing it online and talking about like, well, what's the walkthrough here? And they're like, well, it really depends on what character you made and how you want to behave. Because you don't have to save these people. You don't have to be nice. You can just kill everyone you meet. And I tried to explain to some people on my channel that if the show wasn't what they wanted, it's because the game can be anything they want.
Yeah.
And the shows can't be that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a very frustrating discourse to watch. Have you seen any of it, Austin, of people being very mad about Fallout not being
No, I was about to ask, what is the I saw some headline like I got algorithmically offered some Polygon or IGN or something that was like this invalidates a part of the canon or what, and I didn't even read, so I didn't know what that was referring to. So what are those critiques? Like what are the
There
issues?
are a couple of. It's an interesting one because the Fallout fan base is already in a couple of camps. You know how there are like the people who love New Vegas, and then there are the
Right.
people who love 1 and 2 who already discredit everything Bethesda even did. So it's like
Right, sure, of course.
they're like little pockets who are upset about different things. The main thing that people are upset about is the board that Lucy sees in, I forget what the name of the vault was, when they like her and Maximus land in that vault. It's like what they're teaching
4.
kids. Vault 4, thank you. And there's a little chalkboard that says the fall of Shady Sands 2277, and there's an arrow to the nuke, which I think definitely implies the nuke did not happen in 2277. It happened afterwards, that's why it's next. But the 2277 being the fall of Shady Sands doesn't really line up with the New Vegas timeline. And I don't disagree with that. I think it makes sense, but it like in my head is also they could be wrong. They could be referring to something else as the fall. They could be teaching the kids something incorrect intentionally. Like it's also just I said in my video I used to be like this and grew up where it's like it's fine. Like who I don't need to care about this particular number being on a board. It's fine.
Yeah.
Like
And
it's
I tried to explain it as when we made Fallout, we deliberately tried to keep some things mysteries. Like we didn't explain where goals came from, and we did that deliberately. We argued on the team, and one day I just said, we don't really need to decide this. Let's just leave it, because who would know? But also, I keep reminding people this is a post-apocalyptic world. There is no reliable narrators of whatever has happened.
Right.
And the original games, I said this to someone on my channel. I'm like, if you really are a fan of the game, you have to acknowledge that the first game had unreliable narrators, had quest givers that would lie to you, had quest givers that thought they were telling you the truth but were wrong about what they were telling you. So if you accept that, why can't you accept that the show may have some? Like when they talked, another big problem is they talk about Vault-Tec said that they were planning to launch a nuke, and so then when you see the nukes fall, like, wait, it wasn't Vault-Tec who did the nukes. I thought it was, and there's a whole bunch of other theories of who launched the first nuke. But I reminded them that the game didn't show Vault-Tec launch a nuke. It just showed them talking about it as a contingency plan.
yeah.
They're the ones who connected them up and said, oh, I saw a nuke fly after that. Vault-Tec must have launched it. Maybe, maybe not.
I also felt like that was opaque. I was like, it doesn't necessarily confirm or deny that in either direction. Like, yeah, they had a conversation about it, but yeah, it's basically just I get why people who are passionate about a franchise that they've been experiencing and enjoying for a long time care about this stuff, and I don't like being like, "Hey, crybabies." I'm not a fan of that when it's like they're just people who are very passionate.
Yeah, I mean, you see that all the time with people get mad at Star Wars fans for picking apart all the canon coherency by saying things like, "Oh, is your space wizards with your light swords not like?" And it's very condescending. As a recovering lore, sort of pedantic, annoying person myself,
Same.
I do think it is an expression of passion. It is ultimately someone behaving in the way that you hope on some level that they will. You hope that they will enjoy the thing you've
Totally.
made so much that they look at every last little pixel that it has to offer. So I get that, but
There
that
is a
fun.
lot of toxicity, obviously. So like that doesn't apply to those people who are just like being fucking
Well,
awful to
yeah.
people who now work at Bethesda. Um, they are clearly discounted. So like I get it and I get being passionate about it, but at the same time, I don't think it serves you. Like if you're a huge fan of something and something doesn't align exactly with what you think it should, I just think you're just burning yourself by getting super mad about it when otherwise the show is so accurate to Fallout. Like it in so many ways when so many things have been so bad. Like we've had so many terrible adaptations and it's like this is so tonally correct. It's so funny. I love Lucy. I think Ella Purnell did such a good job and that
Talk
character
about a
like
casting,
just
just
so good.
total slam dunk.
100%. Like
Yeah.
the Vault Tech like little goody two shoes. She's just so
I love
good.
how no matter how long she's out in the surface, she always looks very clean. Her jumpsuit is like perfectly unnaturally clean. It rarely shows signs of kind of like in contrast to basically every single other character. Like that to me strikes a conscientious effort,
Yeah.
production design wise, like to just make her look as foreign to this environment
Yeah.
as humanly possible at all times, just maximally naive and sort of innocent.
What I love is that was the art directors of the first games. That was his point.
Hmm.
Somehow I was in charge also of the palette on the first game. And I went to him one day and I said, "Hey, there's a whole bunch of blues that aren't being used. And I want to extend the palette because we have a lot of browns and greens and not a lot of greens. A lot of other colors. I want to extend it." He goes, "No, I'm going to have you use the blue for something." And he was saving it for the player's jumpsuit. He wanted the player to look distinct and easy to view against any of the backgrounds we had made. So the only blue in the game was supposed to be the blue in the jumpsuit because you never could see the sky, which we imagined was gray anyway. But
Right,
that was the
right,
whole
of course.
point.
It's so
And
smart.
I'm glad they did that in the TV show. You rarely see blues that aren't someone's jumpsuit or of something in the hole.
I mean,
Right.
I guess Bethesda gave them some kind of like lore bible with a bunch of this information, right? Like I imagine they were pretty
They
hands-on
told
with
me
that kind of
that a
stuff.
lot of people on the show, the prop builders, some of the actors were huge Fallout fans.
Awesome.
So that when I asked if some things were Easter eggs, I was super at the premiere. Afterwards, there was a party, and I was going to people going, "Do you know this? Do you know this?" I did that with Jonathan Nolan. I was like, "I have a bunch of questions for you." And sometimes they were like, "We don't know." That actor was a huge Fallout fan, so that may have been a nod to Fallout, but that was something he improv. We don't know. And they go, some of the props were just made by people saying, "Hey, we're going to put this on the wall, or we're gonna have this in the show," and it just looked right, so it went in. But it was an homage to something in one of the Fallout games.
That's so cool. Tim, what do you think what do you think's the hardest part for them to get right? Like before having seen it, what do you think would have been their biggest challenge or the thing that was most important for them to nail?
I was terrified that they were going to get the humor wrong.
Yeah.
That either it was going to be too silly or too slapstick
Yeah.
or too serious.
Yeah, right.
Which
Self-important.
none of those are Fallout. And I think they got it really, really good. There are a couple, I can think of one or two places in the show that the tone made me go, but they were like there and gone. For the most part,
Yeah.
like I love when she goes to the lady in the shop and she goes, "You're one of them vault dwellers, aren't you?" And
Yeah.
then calls her an idiot or dumbass or
Oh,
something.
that character, just that one time there's that character, the lady in the shop, and the guy that Lucy meets in that little house as she's trying to walk by.
That she drank all of her water.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. I love
He's
them
the
both so
actor.
much.
I asked because the way he walked just like one of the villagers in the original Fallout.
No way.
And so I said, was he mimicking that? And that's when Jonathan Nolan and Todd Howard looked at each other and said, we don't know. That actor was a Fallout fan, and we don't know.
That's awesome. So
And then
probably?
I don't know if it's true, but on my channel, someone said that actor's a friend of mine, and he totally was.
No way.
But
That's so cool.
It's YouTube. They may have been lying, but it made me happy. And
Oh,
I'm like,
nobody lies on
there's-
YouTube.
I'm going to pretend that's true, and I'm going to be totally happy.
Yeah, if I think of the only joke that I didn't that I was like, oh, I don't know about that, was when Lucy asks Maximus if he wants to have intercourse.
Yeah.
And that was the only one that I was like, that was a strange
And when he has
choice.
no idea,
Yeah.
when he said, when he's talking about it gets like a pimple. And I'm like,
Yeah. Yeah.
why are you acting?
Like,
But
yeah.
I
mean, he was locked up as a child, I guess, but I was like, he's sort of in the military.
I have a theory that Maximus has a very low intelligence. If you saw his special sheet.
Yeah.
And because sometimes he says and does things. Like when he first gets in a vault suit and he's running around and he's blowing things up and he goes, I'm like, hey, is he dumb?
Yeah.
Is he a dumb character?
He probably is, yeah.
Is
yeah.
is he the PC when you lower your int low and you start getting dumb dialogue?
Yeah.
I have to say, I felt a lot of confidence that they were going to get the humor largely correct when they released the very first trailer, and it said from the studio that brought you The Boys and free 3-day shipping. I thought that's a really good sign. That's a really good sign.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't disagree on those specific scenes, but I overall, I would have been far more worried that it be jokey than too serious, that it constantly feel like, kind of like, because Marvel, the MCU kind of made everybody forget how normal characters talk. It seems like so many movies emulate that constant quippy. It's the Joss Whedon thing being done by people who aren't Joss Whedon, because he had you watch the original Buffy and Angel, which I'm a massive fan of, and the tone was always just right. I mean, it was like his classic little line that always gets repeated is something along the lines of, build them up, break their heart, and then tell a joke or something like that as like writing advice or something. But in the hands of people that don't have that knack for character earnestness, it often just comes across
where that, not at Santa Monica Studio, but on projects outside of my day job, that has had that Marvel quippy writing that I've been like, can we please dial this back a little? And I said this in my review, that it didn't do that where it would have been very easy to, and I was impressed by it because so many modern writers feel like they should. I think it is the Marvel trend where like somebody heals themselves with a stim pack, but they don't say anything. And I'm sure there was some writer somewhere who would have written, my leg doesn't hurt anymore, or like just some comment that they showed a lot of restraint from that I do think makes a huge difference. Like, I'm interested to see if Borderlands can do that too, because Borderlands the brand is more obnoxious in humor than Fallout intentionally, right? Like they should lean into it a little further, but it's just, we're getting very samey with a lot of the humor in a lot of media right now, for sure.
And honestly, I don't even think the MCU has benefited from it, because it's like Robert Downey Jr. is why that worked. It was so singular to his personality, I think, that outside of like the more earnest, like I was recently rewatched for I don't even know how many times now, Logan, and what happens when you treat this just seriously and earnestly, and it's just so good. And I was like opening night Infinity War, totally ready, had an absolute blast. I loved the crowd energy. It was like I was totally there for all of that. So I'm not besmirching the MCU. It's like they've like lost control of, it's like they were in the car and the brake went out and now they're just flying downhill going, I don't know what to do. But yeah, this really beautifully didn't do that.
It's got restraint. Yeah.
Yeah. I gathered that you were, basically fully like in the same position as the rest of us, essentially waiting to see how it went. Then, is from what I'm gathering, what you're saying, that you were not.
I haven't been involved in any Fallout project since the beginning of Fallout 2 in early 1998. I haven't been involved in
Yeah,
any
right.
Bethesda stuff, and I
So
had no
what's that
idea
been
what.
like to watch then?
It's been unusual. I mean, I've been honest by saying they've done things I wouldn't have done.
Hmm.
I even just to show the fans I could do this. I talked about things in the TV show that I didn't like, in the sense of that's not how it should have been, but they were more like things that were there should have been more stuff in the way, so more creatures in the waste. Like I
Mm-hmm.
didn't see any dogs, I didn't see
Mm-hmm.
any rats,
Right.
and they were all over the games. And um, but I think that's kind of like it's first of all it's nitpicky, and second that's the kind of discourse I expected, where we're saying shouldn't I have done this instead of this, not personal attacks against people, or just saying
Yeah.
the whole thing's awful because this one thing was not what I expected. But there's a combination of it's surreal. There's also this I did walk away from it, so I made my peace with this, in 1998. But at the same time, it's been interesting seeing like I don't have any children, but I imagine this is what if you ever had a child adopted by another family and they raised it, and
Yeah.
they did a
Huh.
great job, but
Yeah.
they didn't raise the kid exactly the way you would have.
Yeah.
That's probably how a good way of describing it.
It totally makes sense. Yeah. It's not like you feel negatively about it. It's just different to what, of course it's different to what you would have done, right? You left during Fallout 2, correct?
Yeah, I left about 4 months into the development. They did the whole thing in a year, so you could say I
Wow.
left a quarter to a third of the way into it. Yeah, it was
Damn.
not. It was one of the reasons I left. It was a death march reward. You did so well on Fallout. Let's death
Do it
march on
again.
Fallout.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
And most of us
nuts.
had already been working um, crazy hours, 12
Yeah.
to 14 hours a day, every day, for
Yeah.
months. So
Damn.
my neighbors thought I had moved. They never saw me. I'd
Yeah.
leave really early in the morning and I'd come back in the dead of night, and they just never saw me, and they thought I had moved.
Oh, how
So,
awful. Yeah, no, completely understand why you would want to leave considering that. That's oh man. I think
It's
things have
wild.
gotten better. And
oh, they have. They've gotten
yeah.
much better. When
Like we've heard about some studios still being that way, but I think for the most part things
I think like nothing's perfect. I try to talk about like look at where we came from. I
Yeah.
understand some things still aren't good, but you have to admit they're better. And
Yeah.
then people go, "Oh, you're just being rosy tinted," and
How dare you be positive?
I know, I know. I actually did a whole video recently, like I'm naive and optimistic. I hear it all the time, so I accept it, and I'm like, "Yep." But I do
I
think
feel like that's a
better.
compliment, all things considered, with so many people being so cynical. Naive and optimistic is a huge win.
100%.
Yeah.
No, I'm
But
right. I'm right there with you on that. I is your sense you were talking about there's some subset of folks who are kind of annoyed at you for liking it, but is your impression that it is I know that it's certainly done well in this broad audience sense, but is the kind of Fallout community embracing it overall?
I think so. And I think, as Elena said, there's different subgroups. A lot of people have different things they wish had been done different, and then there's a
Mhm.
few people who are just, I hate it because this thing is wrong. But even
But
they admit,
they're in a
well,
minority.
this
Oh,
visual
for
was
sure.
good, and
Tiny minority.
okay, the vault looks like a vault, but yeah, they got that, and yeah, that looks really good. But I don't like this other stuff. And what I like, what I try to tell people too, is it's fun to have these discussions. If you treat it as, hey, do you think they should have done this, or do you think this is what's really going to happen? Or do you think in season 2 they're going to go, aha, we tricked you? It's really that what that person said was wrong. It's this. That's fun. But then people like to just turn into, well, they did this, it must mean this, and therefore they're stupid.
Yeah.
I'm done. And it's just like, well, you just sucked all the fun out of the room, and it's a TV show. It's of a game. Why are you not enjoying yourself at that
Yeah.
level?
Yeah.
But
Yeah, it's so hard for me to not see it that way as well when it seems so self-evidently obvious that it did the vast majority of things right. Like you have to it seems like you have to look for things to find issue with. And it's like at that point that's a you problem. That's not a Jonathan Nolan and Amazon etc. problem. Like they clearly put a lot of love into it.
and I'll give you an example of lenses, because I told you I've talked to several people on the team, and one of the artists I talked to, I said, "Do you like the show?" And he goes, "I like the show, but oh my God, they got the cars totally wrong. The cars are totally wrong." And I'm like, I guess one of the cars was right. That little car that came up next to Walter Goggins.
Yeah.
That car was right. But Walter Goggins' car was totally wrong.
It's funny, yeah. Different people would notice that based on what they did on the game, which is like I didn't notice the cause at all. Like that's...
Yeah, I mean, I get it because the artists, especially on the first game, who we had to create everything from scratch. Right. There's a car in the opening. There's an ad for a car in the opening cinematic, and then there are cars everywhere rusted out, and there's a whole town made of cars piled up, junk town. The walls of it are piled up cars. So this was a guy who modeled all of the cars in the original Fallout. Right. So of course that's what he looked at when he saw the TV show.
Totally makes sense.
I also think, going back to a comment you made a second ago, it highlights an interesting consideration of game design relative to filmmaking. When you said the wastelands felt very empty in the show, whereas there's a lot of creatures and things that can attack you in all the games. Like you're almost never, it's a noteworthy subset of a map to be in a truly kind of like desert area where there's nothing. That's always usually a kind of quality of a particular portion of the map to make it clear, like, don't go there till you're ready.
They certainly only had rad roaches show up exactly when they needed them for a scene. They show up, I think, twice, and it is only when it would be narratively convenient. Which is
that might be a fair critique, but I was more looking at it through the angle of it would seem to be a more engaging game experience to have an environment full of things you have to contend with, whereas a game where you spend 99% of your time walking towards open-ended horizons with nothing there, that makes for a great montage in a show, and it sells the idea of the wasteland very effectively, but it would seem to be completely at odds with core game design tenets, because unless that's the game unless you want to make
Death Stranding.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, when they had the montage that showed Lucy walking like by a ship in the desert, there was a montage of scenes of her walking. I expected interspersed in there were like a montage of like a pack of dogs coming after her, shooting them, right, or her opening a door and all these big rats, a few of them scattered and a few of them came at her and she shot them. Just you didn't have to focus on it. It could have been a 5-second throwaway scene. So of course I asked them at the premiere because that's what I do. I was like, I told them I loved it, but I'm like, how come you didn't do this? And they said they didn't have a CG or animal budget. Like the dogs were real dogs, I think, that they had trained. Mm-hmm. They had multiple ones too. But of course the rad roaches were CG, and the grouper, the thing that came out was partially CG, and they also had a practical effect.
Puppeted, with the hands.
It often is that, right?
Mouth.
It's often just like if you ask somebody who's making a game, why didn't you do this? The answer is usually budget.
Money. Yeah, it's money.
Somebody thought of that. We just couldn't afford it. It does make sense. It's that simple. But I guess there's also
there was a Deathclaw skull.
Yes,
right at the
end.
Yeah,
because I was wondering, are they gonna do a Deathclaw? Because that's iconic.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're hinting.
Yeah,
you'll get it in season 2.
That's another thing that I will say I quite liked. That's a great point of something to praise about the show, which I think, Alana, you kind of already mentioned this with regard to the stim packs. The restraint to not just say, let's just hemorrhage all the 50,000 little iconography moments of the IP, like let it breathe, where it's, because like, for example, in parallel, I've been watching the X-Men 97, and it has felt like this parade of greatest hits. And overall, I think they've done a good job. But it is a nonstop barrage of here's a thing that existed, here's a thing that existed, here's a thing that existed. And a lot of these return to, long-running IP things that are in the world right now, which are everywhere. All the current Star Wars stuff and all that, they're just so bogged down by this need to constantly reference existing things that I thought that the show, like for example, saying we're not even going to bother with a Deathclaw in the entire first season. We're gonna give you 2 shots of the airship of the Brotherhood of Steel, and we're not going to make it an active part of the narrative in any meaningful way. Like, they're leaving a lot of cards on the table, and that to me shows that they actually believe in it and they actually care about it in ways that probably is easy to not notice, you
The
know?
games themselves have restraint, right? Like, I was just thinking as you're saying that, if I were in that writer's room, I would have had a real tough time not being like, Harold, we have to have Harold in there somewhere. We got to go
Yeah.
find Harold. It's the coolest thing. People will lose their minds. But like, that is something that when you're playing through any of the games and you find Harold, it is a little secret that you find tucked away somewhere. You know, like it should be something that shouldn't just be like thrown in your face.
Right.
It would have been tough not to though, because it's so cool.
Well, it's funny because somebody on my channel said this to me. I didn't realize I never mentioned where are the super mutants. And I
Yeah,
said, how come you didn't mention that? How could you? They are in everything.
yeah,
Where are they?
yeah.
And I said, well, this takes place after the FEV place was destroyed. So super mutants can't. If I understand it correctly, super mutants can't be created anymore. The ones that existed are immortal. They can be killed. So eventually, their super mutants are going to die off.
I mean, we could still come across them, but they'd have to come from wherever they're coming from, I guess.
Unless there's another FEV laboratory somewhere.
Right.
And in the original game, that was it. That was the whole point. You destroyed the source.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that that I like. I appreciate how well it fits with the games in terms of you don't find everything at once in Fallout. That's part of the appeal of playing through any of them, is what you come across and when you come across it. And I think that, yeah, you're just in general, the restraint is very, very fun.
It's classy.
Yeah.
It's and because I feel like that's just so rare that,
Yeah.
that people handle the IP with care. They don't just immediately go straight to the member berries approach, you know? Like it really, yeah. I really thinking through it kind of off the cuff in this moment. I'm like, that might be my favorite aspect of the whole thing. Just this, because if let's say it had tanked, and no one watched it and they were not going to pursue additional seasons, that would mean they would have opted out of a lot of potentially very delicious things to include. But just this belief that, no, you know what? That's still a better version of the show, though, than if we had just crammed in everything as a kind of parade of cameos.
Yeah.
It should be obvious. It should seem like a very obvious, self-evidently true thing, but most media doesn't bear that out,
No.
especially the adaptations. You know, they want to make sure to. I also to point to my neck of the woods. Something else that I thought they did well was the music was obviously completely new to the show. Is all original score. Ramin Djawadi, who's done all of Jonathan Nolan's stuff. But crucially, the opening of episodes 6 and 7 spend a lot of time looking at the kind of glimpses of the world the way that it was. And there's like direct reference to kind of the starting position of a lot of how the world began. And they go very hard quoting the main theme by Enon Zur from Fallout 3 and 4, which I thought was it was actually shockingly subtle in one of the sequences where I was like, wow, if I didn't know that was his theme to Fallout 3, I wouldn't know that that's what I was hearing. And I liked that. Again, it struck me as they're treating the games as like the board that we are playing on. And when we're looking directly at the game board, we use the music as a way to signify we know what we're doing. It's like when she was unfurling her New Republic of California map, it quotes the theme in this major way. And it was like, that's a way of saying we know our roots, which I thought was so cool. Again, I'm assuming, I might be projecting. I haven't talked to any of those people.
I was hoping that some of the Mark Morgan music from Fallout 1 and 2 would have been used. But when I saw how they ended it, and it's obviously going to be in New Vegas, and New Vegas did use a lot of that music, right. I'm hoping they're going, okay, it was all new music with some nods to Fallout 3 and 4. Maybe Season 2 will have some nods to 1, 2, and New Vegas.
I would think
know.
so. I mean, it seems super likely to me. Yeah.
Certainly one would hope.
Yeah, I'm glad it's getting Season 2. Not at all surprised. I was surprised to see how successful it was. I I guess like
Word of
people,
mouth, you know?
it has to have been, right? It has to have been like, I mean, it's not like there isn't a huge Fallout fan
Every
base.
person I've hung out with in the last few weeks,
She's raving about it.
first question I ask is, have you watched it? Because I need to know what I'm allowed to talk about with you. Because this is what I want to talk about.
Yeah.
What's funny is, from my point of view, I'm kind of used to Fallout being underestimated and undervalued, and then surprisingly being a hit,
True.
because that's kind of my world.
That's you
where
witnessed that for 30 years.
No one really cared about Fallout 1 until it just about went out, and then it did so well, they're like, let's make a sequel really quick. And I'm like, okay. So when I heard about it, I've been following it as close as I could. In fact, a friend of mine in New Jersey lived about 20 minutes from where the Red Rocket was, and he sent me pictures. So I got to see there's a gas station there, and they just set dressed it, and then everything around it is CG, because it's a regular neighborhood in New Jersey. Might have been New York. I don't know where the state line is. He lives in Cliffside, New Jersey. So it's about 20 minutes north. And I was like, how is this going to turn into a Red Rocket? And then when I saw it in the show, I remembered looking at it. I even went there in Google Earth and looked around. And it's amazing how they made that into a Red Rocket.
I mean, I would love to see the making of the vaults. I feel like they look like they're huge. I don't know how separate those sets are. Like, or how much of it's green screen or blue screen. Like, the vaults just are perfect.
I was a little disappointed there wasn't a making of in the extras section.
Yeah,
probably forthcoming, especially now that it's been such a hit.
Yeah, true.
Similarly,
somebody shot something, surely.
The from a costume design standpoint, to make the Brotherhood of Steel power armor something that the actors could viably walk around it, just plan on sound design really selling the weight and power of them, but letting it therefore be a thing that the actor could actually act in, and not rely on them being CG, or like just seeing the behind the scenes on like the various actors' Instagrams of them walking around on set and the actors kind of goofing around in the power armor. I was like, wow, they really did a good job making it look imposing but being functional enough that they can literally just wear it around.
The nicest compliment I got on my channel was somebody said they should have you as a cameo in season 2, because they say, Tim, you've aged into looking like the Overseer from Fallout 1. Need you to go get the water chip. I'm like, okay.
They should. I stand by it. They should do that.
We'd
love to see you.
I mean, the impression I get from what you're saying about at the premiere was that I'm hoping that they treated you like that kid at PAX treated you. Like, people were very excited and respectful and appreciative of basically you enabled all their jobs.
It was interesting to walk in past all the fans and influencers who had been invited, none of whom recognized me. I went to the lobby and got popcorn and a Nuka-Cola. None of them knew who I was. I sat down, and then Brian Fargo sat down next to me, and he and I started chatting. Then the show started. And when I went there was an after party, which was mostly cast and crew and people from Bethesda, where I met people. That's where I got the impression that a lot of them, I had people finding me and going, oh, I wanted to find you. What did you think? Showrunner, Jonathan Nolan did that. Todd Howard's brother. The guy who played Maximus, Aaron. I'm so bad with names.
I don't know his name.
I don't remember his name, but Maximus.
Look it up. Maximus, active. Fallout.
But
Aaron Clifton Moten.
Yeah, Aaron Moten. And it was fun because they'd be like, what do you think? And then they just sit there and look at me like they were bracing themselves. Me go, it was the stupidest thing I ever saw. But I loved it. And I often had questions for them. And then that got fun, because that's what I try to tell the people on my channel. It's fun when I ask them questions. Well, what are you going to do with this? And why didn't you have a Deathclaw? Why weren't there packs of wild dogs or rats? And they're like, well, we have answers. And they said money. And I'm like, oh, now I get it.
Yeah.
That's fun.
Yeah.
You can have fun with lore and in being passionate about something without turning it into, I thought you guys were a bunch of jerks and stupid idiots because you didn't have a Deathclaw, you morons.
You're right. You're not asking people to blindly like everything. Just have fun with the things you have questions about or don't like. That's it. Yeah. It's just.
I did wonder how the Nuka-Cola machine in the vault got filled.
Great question. Great question.
Now see, I hate the show.
And on that note, we have to let you go, Tim. Thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find you on the internet if they would like more of your stuff?
They can come to my YouTube channel, Cain on Games.
We'll leave a link in the description. Thank you so much for hanging out. I could have done this for a lot longer, but
That was
alas.
fun.
Thank you so much.
For real, thank you for indulging us.
Alrighty.
Thanks everybody for watching. I'm Alana. I'm a video game writer. That's also watching. He's a video game brother. That's Tim Cain, the creator of Fallout. We will see you in a couple of weeks. Bye.
Bye.